I was thinking this week about if I was given one opportunity. People ask me sometimes, and I'm sure they asked Jeff this, if you had one message, you could only preach one message, what would it be? Well, that's tough. That's very, very tough. Actually, there's probably a text in the Old Testament I would like to spend some time with, Genesis chapter 2 and 3, where humankind gets all fouled up and they think God is mad at them, and they feel shame and alienation, and yet God is standing there the whole time. I think I'd like to talk about that. But the other comes from a story that Jesus tells in the 15th chapter of the Gospel of Luke. It is one of those huge say whats. And it fits perfectly in our series. And I think wherever you are in your life, it's going to fit perfectly with you. Because the most important thing you could ever understand is fundamentally, what is the nature of God like? If you get that wrong at the very beginnings, it's called cumulative error. If you get that wrong, you're just going to drift farther and farther and farther and farther away from what truth is. But if you get it right, what is the fundamental nature of God? If you get that right, it's going to help you the rest of your life. When you fall in a ditch, you make some ridiculous mistake, you do something stupid that you knew was stupid, you had done it before but you did it again, you will know what the nature of God is like. And when you have an opportunity to see someone who has fallen in the ditch and maybe you haven't, you will know what God's nature is like towards them. This is the most important talk you could get today. So I want you to have your thinking caps on, and I want you to look at one of the most beautiful stories in all of the Bible. If you want to look in your Bible, it's in Luke 15, but we'll have it on the screen. Jesus is on record explaining what God is like often in the New Testament, but nowhere is it clearer than Luke chapter 15. He's going to actually use 3 stories to hammer home a point. He wants people to not miss this point, and Jesus argues he knows better than anyone else. He is the anointed one. He is the one who has better insight than anyone who had ever preceded him. This is what God really is like towards all of humanity. His insights, I believe, should cause people to want to shout, "Say what?" Some in praise, and sadly some in disgust. Say what? God cannot be like that. But we discover from the eyes of Jesus, this is exactly what he's like. Luke chapter 15, beginning in verse 1. Now the tax collectors and sinners were all gathered around to hear Jesus. Another way to say this is those outside of the religious circle, they were all sitting at Jesus' feet. But the Pharisees and the teachers of the law muttered, important word, muttered, "This man welcomes sinners and he eats with them." They can't get around the fact that Jesus hangs out with outsiders. Why isn't he always with the insiders? Why isn't he always with the religious group? But no, he's at the pub. He's meeting with the people who are outside of the religious circle. 3 groups of people. There's Jesus. There are the people who are the obvious sinners, the outsiders, and they're the Pharisees mentioned in these first 2 verses, the teachers of the law, those who think of themselves as outstanding people. The verbs tell an interesting story here. Jesus is teaching, the sinners are gathering, the Pharisees are muttering. And the word muttering is an interesting word. It's only used twice in the New Testament. It means an undercurrent of discontented complaining. They're just complaining under the surface, but they don't have the courage to speak directly to the person with whom they're frustrated, but they want to talk among themselves as a way to incite a riot. That's what they're doing. That's what muttering means in this text. They are trying to incite a riot about Jesus. They're saying, we can't believe what he's doing. We can't believe he's meeting with these people. We can't believe they like him and he likes them. This is just wrong. We need to do something about this. That's what muttering is. Their complaint is this: if Jesus is the anointed one, he would know what kind of people were around him and he wouldn't touch them with a 10-foot pole. And not only is he touching them, he is welcoming them and he is eating with them. Verse 2, this man welcomes sinners and eats with them. Notice the contempt. This man. They can't even bring themselves to say his name. They don't say this man, Jesus. This man, he has no standards. He has watered down his faith. He will take anybody in. And again, Luke chooses a word that's very unusual when he says Jesus is receiving or welcoming sinners. This word welcoming is very important. In the original language, Luke adds a prefix to it, which really meant that Jesus was not only welcoming them into fellowship, but he was inviting them to sit down and actually take a seat with him. He was saying, you're a part of me. You're a part of who I am. I'm accepting you as friends. I'm accepting you as friends. He was eating a meal, which is in that culture was sharing at the very deepest levels. He was building spiritual community, a faith-based community where those on the outside were loved just as much as those on the inside. Think about that just a moment. Jesus was building a spiritual community where those on the outside were loved just as much as those on the inside. It's a beautiful picture. It was making the Pharisees furious. So this is the scene. They're ticked off at him. They're muttering about him. He's trying to get them to understand what God is really like. And he begins to tell 3 stories. Only time in the Bible he tells 3 stories to hit a point. A lot of times a teacher will kind of do a 1-2 combination, right? Just a boom, boom. But this is 3 stories. It's like boom, boom, boom. He's setting them up to say, this is what God is like. He tells them the story, Luke 15:4. If a man has 100 sheep and one of them gets lost, what will he do? Won't he leave the 99 others in the wilderness and go and search for the one that's lost until he finds it? And when he has found it, he will joyfully carry it home on his shoulders. When he arrives, he will call together his friends, his neighbors, saying, rejoice with me because I have found my lost sheep. In the same way, there's more joy in heaven over one lost sinner who repents and returns to God than over 99 others who are righteous and who haven't strayed away. Then he goes for a second story. Or suppose a woman has 10 silver coins and she loses one. Won't she light a lamp and sweep the entire house and search carefully until she finds it? And when she finds it, she'll call in her friends and her neighbors and she'll say, rejoice with me because I have found my lost coin. In the same way, there's joy in the presence of God's angels when even one sinner repents. Now, these are good stories. They're kind of giving a foundation. This is what God is like. God is like a shepherd who searches after the one sheep. He has 100, but he cares for the one that's far away. The woman who has 10 coins, she loses one. God is like this woman. He cares to find that one coin that is lost. Very, very important. But in verse 11, Jesus is going to ratchet the stakes very, very high. And I want you to get this. Verse 11, to illustrate the point further, Jesus told them this story. A man had 2 sons. Now, automatically, all the listeners would have realized what was happening, that the sheep was one thing, the coin was quite something else, but now it's a human being at stake. The story's about to get interesting, and they're all leaning in. They want to hear what this rabbi is wanting to share with them. We have termed this particular story, by the way, the prodigal son. There are actually going to be 2 sons in this story, and they're both important, but the story is not about them nearly as much as it's about the father. Jimmy leads us in a song sometimes called Good, Good Father. That's what this is about. It's a parable about a wonderful father. It's Jesus saying, this is the picture of what God fundamentally is like. Get this story and you will get God. Verse 12. The younger son tells his father, I want my share of your estate now before you die. So his father agreed to divide his wealth between his sons. Did you get that? Give me my share of the estate. Let's hold on just for a moment there. Ken Bailey, who's a scholar, a New Testament scholar, in his amazing work on this parable, says if you went to the Middle East right now, you go to a Middle Eastern village right now, and you ask any of the villagers what the father's response would be to this request to a son saying, give me half of your estate right now, they said any Middle Easterner would say there would be anger to the degree that there would probably be physical and verbal blows assaulted on the son. There would be a disinheriting of the son. There's no question about this. He would be disinherited. Can you imagine, old man, I'm tired of waiting around for you to die, so let's just pretend like you're dead now and give me everything. Give me everything that I'm supposed to have. And then Jesus goes on to say, not many days after that, the son gathered all he had and he left. Interesting that not that many days after that he left. Here's the idea. The family had servants. The family had cattle. The family had a lot of wealth. It was going to take the father a few days to liquidate assets. It's not like he just had half of the estate in a drawer. He had to sell off cattle. He had to sell off sheep. He had to sell off land. He had to do these things. It was the talk of the town. Everybody knew what this father was doing. His son had so disrespected him. His son had said, listen, I just want to pretend you're dead now. Give me half of the estate so I can be on my merry way. The day cannot come soon enough. He just wants to get out of town. When the cashier's check is ready, he puts it in his hand. He walks to the gate. He shakes the dust of that little town off of his feet, and he cannot leave from their presence fast enough. He never looks back. He never wants to go back. It's over. And to the audience that's listening, it would be utterly unthinkable that a son, while his father was still alive, would ask for his share of the estate. That would blow their minds. They could not fathom that. This would have been perceived as the most hurtful event that could have possibly happened in the life of the father. The most hurtful thing in the life of the father. It would have been offensive. It would have been humiliating. It would have been disrespectful to the point of being almost like a mutiny. And it would have shown a deep disrespect to the point that it was tantamount to saying, I wish my father were dead. That's right, Dad, I wish you were dead. Give me half of the estate. Give me what is mine so I can get out of this sorry place. Verse 13, a few days later, this young son packed all of his belongings and he moved to a distant land, and there he wasted all of his money in wild living. He goes to a distant country, everything that looks good, everything looks shiny, everything looks bright. He indulges, has himself a good time until the money runs out. And the money almost always runs out. Verse 14, about the time his money ran out, a great famine swept over the land and he began to starve. I like the way Jesus chooses his words, a great famine, not just a famine, a great famine. Most of us have no idea what this means, but think about it. In that day when a great famine struck, there's no outside communication. There's no Red Cross. There's no telethons to raise support. There's no communication. Even if there was support, there's no way to get it to where it needs to go. There's basically no hope. When a great famine hits, there's no hope. A great famine meant, and there are accounts of all kinds of great famines in the ancient world, murder, thievery, bodies left outside to rot in the streets, children being sold into slavery, cannibalism. Jesus listeners know this. Oh my gosh, this boy, a great famine has swept upon him. He is in a mess. Verse 15, he persuaded a local farmer to hire him, and the man sent him into the fields to feed the pigs. The young man became so hungry that even the pods he was feeding the pigs looked good to him, but no one gave him anything. Now the point behind this, and I want you to get this, is even when this is going on, the boy does not want to go home. He doesn't want to go home. And this is something that most of us miss when we hear the story the first time. He doesn't want to go home. But I want to ask you a question. Why not? Why doesn't he want to go home? Because he knows what's waiting for him if he does. When a Jewish boy squanders his inheritance among Gentiles, if he dared to try to return home, the entire community would gather upon his return. All of the town would come. Remember, the Jews in the first century were very visual. When they do things, they demonstrate it with visible, visual kind of acts. And as a symbol of how destructive this boy had been, how he had broken his relationship with his community, he had broken his relationship with his family, he has broken his relationship with his father, the town would judge this son with a very dynamic gesture. Think about this with me. The entire village would gather together, and when that boy tried to come home, they would take a clay pot as a symbol of his life, and they would break it before him. This is their way of saying, this is the brokenness that you have caused in our community. You have broken everything that is good. You have broken trust, you have broken community. Worse than that, you have broken the heart of your father, and your damage is beyond compare. So let this broken clay pot be a symbol of your brokenness forever. Let these broken pieces be your life forever. You are not whole. You are not welcome. You are not family. You are cut off forever. In fact, they call this ceremony kizaza, which is, in Hebrew, it means cut off. Kizaza. Say that with me. Kizaza. Can you imagine that? The broken pot. You are kizaza. You are cut off forever. You are broken forever. You are not welcome in this place. Let me pause for just a moment and say some of us, not all, but some of us have felt this kind of brokenness. And we normally have a kindred spirit when we meet someone else who has known that kind of brokenness. It's a horrible feeling, and some of us know that feeling. So this boy, he knows what's waiting for him. That's why he stays away, even when there's so much pain, even when he's sleeping with pigs, even when he doesn't have anything to eat. He's not thinking about going home. That's out of the question. Verse 17, when he finally comes to his senses, he says to himself, so he finally hits a point where he is so hungry, so starving, even though he has tried to put it off and put it off and put it off, he finally says, at home, even the hired servants have food enough to spare. Here I am dying of hunger. I will go home to my father and I'll say, Father, I've sinned against both heaven and you. I'm no longer worthy of being called your son. Please, please, please take me on as a hired servant. So he finally gets past that deal. I'll have to face the town, but I can get through that. I'm just going to tell my dad, I have blown it. I know I've blown it. I've sinned against you. I've sinned against heaven. I've sinned against the family. Would you just, I'm never good enough to be your son. I get that, but would you just let me be a servant? Just something. Verse 20, and while he was still a long way off, his father saw him coming. Now the boy had rehearsed his coming home, but there's one thing he didn't count on, and that's at the gate of the house, there had been an old man who had been standing there since the day the boy left, staring out, just hoping one day he would see his son coming back. He's looking over the horizon as he does every day, hoping against hope that his precious son will come home. And on this day, way in the distance, he sees the gate of a man, and he recognizes that gate. I can tell you something. If Ethan is in the airport, he could be 200 yards away from me and he could be walking away from me. But if I could catch his gait, how he walks, I would know that's my son. That's my son. This father had watched his little boy walk since the very first step he took. He knew in the distance, he couldn't see his face, but he knew that's my son. Verse 20, filled with love and compassion, he ran to his son. He embraced him and he kissed him. Now y'all, this is all going to be an understanding of who God is. This verse is packed. When Jesus tells this part of the story to that group of people listening to him, the non-religious types, some of them began to cry because they were recognizing themselves in the story of the son far away and the Father being God running to him. When Jesus said the Father ran, he uses a technical term to describe what the Father did. It was normally reserved for athletic contest. Literally, the idea would be the Father raced or the Father sprinted. Now, you got to understand this. In the Middle East, the patriarch of a family, the father of a wealthy family, he was a man of great dignity. He had great authority. He dressed in elaborate, ornate robes. He always walked slowly and in a deliberate fashion, and he never ran. Never. Strong, in control men don't run. For this father to sprint would mean he would have to gather up the edges of his robe so he didn't trip over them, and that would mean he would be displaying his naked leg. And in 2,000 years ago, the Middle East, These types of men did not display a naked part of their body, his naked legs. Little boys could show their legs. Maybe servants on the bottom rung of society could show their legs, but a wealthy landowner did not show his legs. This father was willing to be humiliated to run towards his son. Now, my question to you is, why would he run toward his son who is walking towards him? He can't stop thinking about his broken son and the fact that if the village people get to him before the father gets to them, it will mean kizaza. It will mean brokenness. It will mean more shame. It will mean more humiliation. It might crush his son's heart. It might be the last straw. And so he runs, sprints, races with everything in him. He is going to get to his son before the villagers get to his son. His son will not have another humiliating moment. This is Jesus describing the heart and the nature of God. I cannot let this happen. The father picks up his robes and he begins running. That father is filled with compassion. He takes on humiliation that by all rights belongs to the son, but he lets it all fall on himself. Of all the twists in this remarkable story that has amazed the human race for 2,000 years, this is the one that's most unexpected to the people that Jesus is talking to. This father does what no father in that world would ever do. This father runs because this father has never stopped loving his son, never, ever, ever stopped loving his son. That was never even a possibility for him to stop loving his son. His love never changed. The boy never stopped needing his father. No matter how far away he was, the boy needed his father. He didn't know that. That's why it's not the prodigal son. It's not the story of the prodigal son. It's the story of the good father. The father who runs to his son. God is so filled with compassion for you, whatever distant country you've ever been in, whatever terrible things you feel like you have done, it has not changed God's opinion about you one bit. And when he sees you just beginning to make just a tiny turn, he runs to you with everything he has. He wants the humiliation to stop. He wants the pain to stop. He wants you to know that you're whole. He can make you whole. Verse 21, his son, when the father gets there, his son says, "Father, I have sinned against both heaven and you, and I'm no longer worthy of being called your son." The father gets to the boy, and the boy starts the story that he's been practicing. But verse 22, the father says to his servants, he doesn't even let him finish. He says, quick, bring the finest robe that you have. Why? He wants to cover his son's nakedness. He doesn't want, some people would want to parade him through town to let everybody see how terrible his situation has been. Not this father. This father wants to put the finest robe on him. Get a ring on his finger, letting everyone know he has full authority. He is my son. Put sandals on his feet. He's not a beggar in a foreign land. He's my son. Kill the fatted calf. We need to celebrate with a feast. This son of mine was dead. He's now returned to life. He was lost. He's found. So the party began. I love this father. Bring out the best robe, my most expensive ring, my finest shoes. Kill the fatted calf. There will be no kizaza here. Not here. He's home. You're not cursing my son. He's home. There's going to be music and dancing and feasting, and there'll be a party because my son was lost, but he's home. There's no distance you can travel that when you don't make that turn, there's not rejoicing in the presence of God, that you want to really know him, be with him. At one point, this is just the perfect story for anybody who has drifted away, anybody who's gone on your own and kind of lost it. just to let you know, just turn towards God. Let him embrace you. He's not mad at you. He doesn't want you to be 1 second with shame. Just turn to him. But then there's a new twist to the story to show what God is like even towards religious people. Verse 25, meanwhile, the older brother was in the fields working, and when he returned home, he hears music and dancing in the streets, and he asks one of the servants what's going on, and they say, your brother is back, and your father has killed a fattened calf. We are celebrating because of his safe return. The older brother was so angry he wouldn't go in. Y'all, this is religious people. This is religious people. Well, he's been a shame-filled younger brother. I'm not going to go in with him. He's done all kind of horrible things. I'm not going in with him. His father came out and begged him. This is a picture of God saying to the religious people, embrace those people that you don't get. You don't understand their story. They've kind of soiled their name a little bit. Embrace them. All these years, the son says, I've slaved for you and never once refused to do a single thing you told me to do. And in all that time, you never gave me even one young goat for a feast with my friends. Yet, hear this contempt, when this son of yours, not when my little brother, but when this son of yours comes back after squandering your money on prostitutes, you celebrate by killing the fattened calf. He's saying, Dad, I can't go there. I can't. That is so beneath me. He has wasted your money. He's been with prostitutes. He's done all these things, and we don't know why he said that, but that's where his mind was. He's done all these things. You've never thrown a party for me. You've thrown this big party for him. I'm not going in. In the ancient world, the older brother's role at a party was fairly significant, a party like this. The father would be seated, but the elder brother would in the way it's supposed to be done, he would be almost like a head waiter. He would be the one who would be walking around saying, do you have enough to eat? Is everything going good? Or, we're so honored that you're here. We're so happy you're in our home. We're so happy to have you here. Let me get you a little more wine. That was the elder brother's role, and he is publicly not doing it. Listen, what the younger brother did was humiliate the father privately. What the older brother is doing is humiliating his father publicly, because everybody's looking around. Where is the older brother? He is not coming in. And he's so filled with resentment. And some of you need to hear this, because some of you have issues with resentment. Resentment makes you feel good just a little bit, but it ultimately can kill you. It'll kill you. It feeds something really dark. This older brother likes torturing himself. He likes hearing the music and saying, nobody's ever done this for me. I've been the good guy my whole life, and the whole world's raining down on me. This is just really great. I read something recently about how resentment works. There's a primitive method of killing wolves in the far north, where the hunter will take a clump of meat and he will impale it with a knife, and he will just leave it in the snow. A wolf will come along and he will start devouring the meat, and he'll begin to eat it greedily. And when it gets close to the knife, the wolf will prick his own tongue. But because of the cold, and because the wolf is in such a frenzy over its greed for food and the taste of blood, it doesn't realize when it begins to consume its own blood. It just keeps eating. It will go on until it cuts itself so badly it will bleed to death. It was destroyed by its own appetite for its own blood. Resentment works that way. You're at the knife and you start feeding on your own sense of self-righteous superiority. Then your own soul starts bleeding to death. It's sad. Verse 31, his father says to him, "Look, dear son." That's a beautiful word, by the way. Shocking to Jesus' listeners. He could have used the word huios, which means my son, but Jesus uses a more tender word. He uses the word teknon, which means my child or my little one. This father is saying, listen, my little one, listen, my child. You have always been with me, and everything I have is yours. Don't you realize that we've been able to live together all these years? I didn't know it was about stuff. I thought I loved having you with me every day. Every day I loved that you and I were together. The father's gracious to the elder son, but he's not giving up his power. He's not letting the elder brother call the shots. And everybody's waiting to see what's going to happen next. The father says, listen, your brother was lost, and now he's found. Won't you come into the party? And then the story ends. It just stops. If you keep reading, the next thing that happens is chapter 16 of Luke. It's a totally different setting. Jesus is with the disciples. He ended the story. Why? Because you have to fill in how it ends. You have to imagine that you were the older brother. And there were really two options, weren't there? The older brother could have said, fine, I'm not going in. I'll keep doing what I do. I'll keep taking care of the farm, and one day you'll die and I'll get my inheritance, but I am not on the page you are of embracing him. That's one way it could have ended. Or there's the better way of the brother falling on his face and saying, Dad, I'm so sorry. I don't know what got into me. I'm so sorry. I've missed my little brother too. And then to see him get up and wipe his face and go in and look for that skinny, scrawny little brother that he had played with since they were little boys, that he had wrestled with. And now to see that emaciated little guy with that big robe on him and to just hug him and embrace him and say, I am so glad you are home. I have missed you so much. We have so much time we have to make up. There's so many things we have to do. You are my brother forever. Don't ever do anything like that again. Which is the kind of church we want to be? Do we want to be the kind of church that says, never screwed up like that, I don't want those people around me? Never done anything as shameful. They're not in our class, they're not in our league, I don't want to really be around them. Or do we want to be the kind of church that says, we are so glad you are here. You are home. You are home. We are going to walk this road together. Doesn't matter where you've been, doesn't matter the mistakes you've made. God loves you, embraces you. There's no longer shame. There's no longer any judgment. There's no condemnation. Never has been any condemnation. There is just pure love for you. You decide. We get to decide. Would you bow your heads, please? Father, thank you for this beautiful picture that Jesus tells of what you, our Heavenly Father, what you are like. Oh God, may we think long and hard what kind of church we want to belong to. What kind of community do we want to build in this place? And Father, I pray one day, every Sunday would be a Sunday of celebrating people coming home.